All right, let's just jump right in. We're about to take a look at one of the weirdest, most misunderstood, and honestly, one of the most fascinating corners of our own biology. We are talking about the science of the orgasm. And trust me, it gets so much weirder than you could possibly imagine. So, let me just start by asking you a question that sounds, well, completely insane. Could you have an orgasm just from brushing your teeth? Now, I know it sounds like a joke, but the science behind this is surprisingly real. Okay, so here's the key thing you gotta understand. At its absolute core, an orgasm is a simple reflex. It's not really a conscious event. It's run by your autonomic nervous system. That's the same part of you that takes care of stuff like your heart rate, your breathing, digestion, all the things you don't think about. And once you realize it's just a reflex, like a knee jerk, you start to see how it could be triggered by all sorts of things. And the list of things that can trigger this reflex, it is just wild. I mean, sure, genital stimulation is the obvious one, but the famous researcher Alfred Kinsey actually interviewed a woman who could reach orgasm just by having her eyebrows stroked. There are real, documented cases of knee orgasms, and yep, even orgasms sparked by the complex sensory experience of brushing your teeth. And this is where these weird biological facts get, well, kind of human and a little sad. The neurologist who studied that toothbrushing case confirmed it wasn't the minty flavor or anything. It was the motion itself. And you'd think, wow, this woman must have incredible dental hygiene, right? But no. Tragically, the journal paper reported the whole thing was so upsetting, she became convinced she was possessed by demons, and she just stopped brushing her teeth. It's a really powerful reminder of how bizarre our own bodies can be. You know, thinking of it as a simple reflex, that's a pretty modern take. For centuries, science and medicine have been trying to figure out the orgasm. And that journey led to some truly wild theories, and believe it or not, a few surprising medical uses. Okay, one of the wildest, longest-lasting ideas was something called the upsuck theory. The thinking was that the contractions during a female orgasm actually helped suck semen up through the cervix to make conception more likely. And this wasn't some fringe idea. This goes all the way back to Hippocrates. It was even given as royal medical advice to Empress Maria Theresa, who was having trouble getting pregnant. Her doctor literally advised her that her vulva needed to be titillated. But the medical theories weren't just about making babies. How about a cure for hiccups? Back in 1999, there was a case report about a guy in Israel who had intractable hiccups, the kind that just will not stop for days. Well, he stumbled on a cure that was, let's just say, not in any medical textbook. Yep, you heard that right. After days of constant hiccuping, he had sex with his wife, and they just stopped. His doctor was so amazed he published a case report on it called Sexual Intercourse is a Potential Treatment for Intractable Hiccups. And my favorite part? The paper actually seriously suggested that masturbation could be a good option for what it called unattached hiccupers. A whole new field of medicine. All right, so let's take this idea that it's just a simple reflex, totally separate from conscious thought, and let's push it to its most extreme, maybe even unsettling conclusion. Just how far can we take that idea? To get there, we first have to talk about something called the Lazarus reflex. This is a very real spinal reflex that you sometimes see in a brain-dead person who's being kept on a respirator for organ donation. You stimulate a specific spot, and the body will reflexively raise its arms and cross them over the chest. It's a pure, unconscious spinal response. The brain has absolutely nothing to do with it. So that leads to a pretty wild question, doesn't it? If the Lazarus reflex can happen in a brain-dead person, and we know the orgasm is also a simple spinal reflex, could you, in theory, trigger an orgasm in someone who is clinically dead? And the answer? I mean, this is going to sound shocking, but according to a brain death expert, yes, it's theoretically possible. As long as that sacral nerve root, the little headquarters for the reflex, is still getting oxygen, it could happen. It's really the ultimate proof that the physical reflex is totally separate from the mind. Now, of course, there'd be no conscious experience, no pleasure, just a pure mechanical physical response. So how on earth did we figure any of this stuff out? Well, back in the 1950s, a couple of pioneering researchers decided it was time to study sex scientifically. And to do that, they had to get incredibly creative and, frankly, pretty audacious to see what was really going on inside our bodies. This is where Masters and Johnson come in. They hear about this centuries-old upsuck theory, and, well, they're scientists. They're skeptical. They don't want to just rely on ancient ideas. They wanted to see it with their own eyes. And they were willing to build whatever it takes to find out the truth. So, their solution.
How do you see what's happening inside a woman's body during orgasm in the 1950s? Simple. You invent an artificial coition machine. It was basically this clear acrylic phallus that had a camera and a light inside of it, hooked up to a motor. Women would use the device, and Masters and Johnson would watch and see if any upsucking was actually happening. Spoiler alert, they found zero evidence for it.
And of course, if you're going to run that experiment, you need artificial semen. And this is my favorite part, the sheer clinical, almost funny way they documented it. I found the actual recipes they use in the scientific literature. You could use flour and water or cornstarch and water. But the best part was the measurement for the yield. It didn't say makes 2 cups or anything like that. The instruction was yield 1 ejaculate. At the same time, you've got the other giant of sex research, Alfred Kinsey, and he was also pushing the boundaries. He was less interested in what was happening inside the body and more focused on things you could actually measure on the outside. Specifically, he'd heard this theory that the force of ejaculation had something to do with fertility. Kinsey thought that was probably nonsense, so he decided to measure it. He brought 300 men into his lab with a tape measure and a camera. And while he found that for most men the fluid really isn't ejected forcefully at all, he did find a record holder. The greatest distance traveled? 7 feet, 10 inches. But honestly, my favorite detail from that whole experiment is a little note from Kinsey's book. It just perfectly sums up this bizarre mix of groundbreaking science and, just practical, everyday concerns. Right in the middle of all the data, he wrote, 2 sheets were laid down to protect the oriental carpets. Okay, so we've got weird triggers, strange medical uses, and some very creative experiments. But it all leaves you wondering, right? What's the evolutionary point of all this? Is there some biological reason for this powerful and sometimes very strange reflex? Well, the theory is a little different depending on the species. For human guys, one idea is that the drive to masturbate often makes sure there's a constant supply of fresh, healthy sperm, which are better for conception. But honestly, some of the most convincing evidence, it doesn't even come from humans. It comes from pigs. This is real. In Denmark, the National Committee for Pig Production figured out that if you sexually stimulate a sow while you're artificially inseminating her, the number of piglets born goes up by 6%. So they created an official 5-point plan for farmers, complete with posters and a DVD, showing them exactly how to mimic the courtship of a boar to get better results. It's science in action. And this detail just perfectly captures the human side of all this science. A researcher was asked, why doesn't the plan just tell the farmers to stimulate the pig's clitoris directly? And her answer was amazing. She said it was already a huge challenge just to get them comfortable with step 4. So they decided, let's not mention the clitoris right now. So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that something we think of as so deeply personal and psychological is, at its very root, a piece of biological machinery. A simple reflex. It can be triggered by a toothbrush, it could theoretically happen after death, and it can be used to make more bacon. Which really leaves us with one final thought. If the orgasm reflex is this weird and this complex, what other simple unconscious parts of our own biology are hiding secrets we haven't even begun to understand?